Welcome in. Thanks so much for joining me. So I've decided to do a series on what I'm calling for the moment, what to do when your practice gets stuck. So I've offered some content on this from time to time, usually in the realm of like finding more consistency in our meditation practice, things along, those lines. But I was reflecting on it and realizing there's so many ways we get stuck or hit what's called like a spiritual or path plateau. There's so many ways we get stuck that don't necessarily relate to consistency issues. And by consistency, I just mean when people lose regular everyday formal meditation. Of course, that's one thing, but I think there's more to say around this. So yeah, welcome to a little mini series I'll do on my podcast and YouTube channel, where I'll offer some ideas on what to do when you get stuck in your practice, when you hit a spiritual plateau. This is really for anyone. I would just say if you're kind of interested in meditation, if you've been meditating for a little while, or you're hardcore Buddhist practitioner, you've been practicing for a long time and you've hit ruts, or you're hitting a rut right now, or you want to know what to do when you hit the next rut. For those of us who have been in this for a while, it's just there'll always be another rut. Maybe not always, but there are more ruts, and that's just the path. That's sort of natural to it. And at some point, we're kind of okay with that, but we also have to know how to move through them. So yeah. So this first episode on it, I really want to talk about devotion because this is something that is becoming more prominent in my personal spiritual practice and my Buddhist practice. And I think there's lots of ways to think about devotion. And I think a really great way to frame it for ourselves is as something we can do when we do hit a spiritual plateau, when we do get stuck. Now, just right off the bat, I just want to say there's many definitions of devotion and different kinds of spiritual paths. Even within Buddhism, there's not like one particular thing we're devoting to and or one specific like expression of devotion. There can be lots of different flavors. In the Vajrayana traditions of Buddhism, I would say devotion is the most prominent. As far as from what I've seen, but I think this is also a cultural issue where certain cultures, generally ones that are more indigenous Buddhists, they tend to have less issue with more devotional forms of practice. And what I've seen is like pretty much every form of Buddhism has some element of devotion, whether it's in Japan or Thailand or Burma or Tibet or Nepal and India. It really... You can see devotion, China as well, Chinese Mahayana Buddhism. Some feature it more prominently, some a little bit less. But generally for like non-indigenous Buddhist practitioners, meaning those of us who have converted to some degree, or who maybe wouldn't consider ourselves Buddhists, but we practice meditation in like a Buddhist style, or we've learned from Buddhism to help our meditation. We tend to have aversions towards devotion because it can remind us sometimes of the religions we left, especially when we were required or asked to have blind faith, and we felt those were being used as ways of control over us. So totally sympathetic to that. I understand. I kind of view that as just something we have to take into account and work with, almost like a type of a trauma. But either way, there is room to discover, for those of us who are convert Buddhists, there is ways to discover fresh devotion and ways to work with it. Personally, I found some of the Vajrayana perspectives to be the most helpful for me because they are the least theistic, right? And Buddhism being a complete non-theistic tradition, I think some people are surprised when they see devotion as a part of it, especially when they go to a culturally Buddhist country, China, Japan, etc., Nepal. They sometimes are surprised how devotional it is, and how much it reminds them of Western religion. And what I want to say here too is like, yeah, it doesn't have to be that different. I think there's qualities of devotion, authentic devotion that cross the barriers of spiritual paths and religions, etc. But at the same time, I also want to challenge you when you see that to see it from a different lens, because obviously we're coming with a lens coming from more Judeo-Christian perspectives that have a certain theistic bent. Not to say that's wrong or bad or anything. It's just Buddhism doesn't have that. Its intention is not to be a theistic kind of devotion. So we have to look at it with a slightly different lens. And at the same time, I think it's more challenging because when you're thinking of like non-theism in relation to devotion, the question comes, well, what are we devoting to if there's not an external, I don't know, figure or higher power or creator or whatever it is, right? Where does devotion actually get sent? What is it directed at? So I don't know if I'll be able to answer that necessarily in the deepest way in this particular episode, but I certainly find that question really profound to explore and encourage you to explore it. But to a certain extent, we do need to talk about it because to understand devotion from the perspective, I'm going to share it. So I'm going to just define devotion in a really wide way to start, which again crosses religious barriers. I would say it even crosses the barrier of being religious or not. It's just sort of being a human being. And so one of the fundamental qualities of devotion I found that's universal is surrender. Now the question of like, who are we surrendering to and what are we surrendering? That's where the difference can lie. But again, we'll get into the weeds in a little bit. But just talking about surrender itself, you know, when you reflect on the qualities of surrender, when you felt that, if you have, when you think about it, what does that involve? You know, I know when I reflect on it, surrender evokes openness for me. When I felt surrender, there's openness, there's humility, like very genuine, authentic humility in that moment. There's often love, right? There's qualities of like connection. So all these like very positive things come out of I'll call it a healthy surrender. We're not talking about like surrendering our will. No, that's a tricky one. Let me say it this way. We're not talking about like surrendering our power or like giving up our power. This is like a common misunderstanding that happens a lot also in Vajrayana Buddhism, where people think, you know, especially with a teacher, they think, oh, now I have to like, no, they're in charge of my life and I have to give all my power to them. Actually, if we do that, what I say, like any Lama or Vajrayana master worth their salt will, by all means necessary, work to, first of all, they won't accept our power and they'll work to help us understand that that's a bad idea, like not to give it away, right? Or they might accept it for a little while until we're more mature and then help us to connect with our inner Buddha nature where the real power is at, which no one can give to you, actually. Anyways, so I think surrender is not about that. It's not about giving away our power. It's this full openness, this full heartedness, right? Sometimes for me, it's also related to like living fully, you know, living life fully, living from a place where I don't know all the answers. I don't know exactly what to do all the time or you know, what the right choice is. And so I can sometimes let go, just release and be open. Of course, be curious, be aware, don't check out, but be open. So for me, that's probably the single most qualities, the openness that comes out of surrender. So starting from that definition, that kind of more open, universal definition of surrender, then we have this question of sort of what are we surrendering to and what are we surrendering and whom are we surrendering to? Because this topic is more, I want to share like how to use devotion to cut through spiritual plateaus or when we're getting stuck in our practice. I don't want to talk about too much about this, but it's important because if we don't talk about the view, what we call the view in Buddhism, of why we're doing this, it can get really lost and kind of messy and mushy in the explanation. So the view here is important. And the view really, when it comes to devotion, has to do with what are we surrendering and who are we surrendering to? So there's many ways to also say this. I'm just going to give one kind of way. Generally, what we're surrendering our ego clean, because as a Buddhist practitioner, we recognize that fundamentally it's our ego clinging, it's our clinging to self, to prioritizing this illusory self that we think exists. When we prioritize that and we feed that, we actually suffer more. Not only do we create more harm towards others, but we actually suffer more because we take things more seriously, we take them more personal. When we have a certain emotional reaction or belief, we take that really seriously, and that causes pain. And we can see that in just very basic ways. We don't have to go deep into the weeds to see that. We can just see how that can cause suffering. And so we're surrendering that, essentially. We're surrendering that, this framework of who we think the self is at any given moment is a very limited way to live. It's a very limited way to think of ourself and our place in the world, instead of what we call the interdependent self. So Buddhism doesn't believe that the self doesn't exist. It believes the independent self doesn't exist. So instead, this mirai, this interdependent self that's interconnected and changing, impermanent, moving, shifting all the time in relationship all the time, instead we pay attention to that. We're aware of that. And so when we're able to surrender the fixed, solid, permanent, independent self, we're able to find this mirai, or interdependent self. Mirai just means it's there. It's sort of like it's in relationship. But when we try to find the locus point of it, when we try to find, oh, that's it, and it's the same all the time, we can't find that because it's changing all the time. It's changing in relationship to the things around us, to our emotions, thoughts, etc. So anyways, this is a bit of a deeper dive in Buddhism, but I want to mention it because if we don't talk about this, the devotion part gets more murky. So either way, we're learning to surrender that. And just on a basic level, if that's a little bit too much of a deep dive for you, we're learning to surrender our reactions, right? Like our fixed reactions. When we have like a really strong emotional reaction of self-righteousness, surrender that, right? Surrender that. Work on that. That's my advice. And what are we surrendering to? This is where it becomes, I think, very interesting. On an outer level, we do have a higher power in Buddhism. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Arhats, those who have basically seen the truth of reality, cut through this independent self, the ego kind of clinging. They managed to cut through that, and so those individuals or those beings do become like sustainable objects or resources of refuge for us, and so we can surrender to them. On an outer level, just like we would to a friend who we really trust, a friend who we really feel has our best interest in mind and will not deceive us. That's the main point. So sometimes in prayer or chanting or certain practices we do in Buddhism, we surrender our faults to them. We admit them, basically, not in the form of like confession in sort of a guilt confession sense. It's more just like surrender, opening them. I have this thing. I don't want them anymore. I see it causes pain. And you're surrendering it to someone who also knows, yeah, that causes pain, and they want to help you, essentially. So on the outer level, that's kind of there, but that's actually not quite sufficient. That's not that direct. That's sort of like the indirect, how would we say this? Kind of like, that's like the sign pointing somewhere. It's not the actual destination. It's just sort of the sign that's kind of saying, okay, yeah, I'm not the real thing, but I'm here to represent the real thing. Some people might get pissed off about that, which is fine. You can disagree with me. If you want to cling to the outer Buddhas and all of that, go for it. I like to interact with them, and in the sense of I can't see them, but I like to make aspirations and feel they're around and sort of, helping me and request their help. That's a part of my practice. But at the same time, I know it's just a symbol. It's just a sign. It's something pointing to the deeper truth. So what is the deeper truth? So the deeper truth is our own Buddha nature, our own awake nature that is fully awake. It's covered. It's obscured. This is one of the reasons we surrender to an outer refuge, is because that helps us to uncover or point back to the inner refuge. Again, this whole sense of like the teacher or the Buddha, is never going to take our power away. They're just going to help us to understand, well, first of all, it never left. And how do you say it? It's already there. It's innate. So this is what I find so interesting in the Buddhist path. It's always pointing back to our innate awakened nature, our innate compassion, our innate wisdom, our innate love. And, although we don't necessarily connect with that all the time or feel it strongly, the point that is there is really helpful, because then we can have something to do. We can have something to uncover. And essentially, that's what the path is. Essentially, that's what devotion is, right? We're surrendering our ego clinging to this path of finding our awake nature, right? So it serves that direction. So again, and that awake nature is not a soul, it's not a something, it's back to the very thing we're surrendering. So the thing we're surrendering and the thing we're surrendering to are the same thing, essentially. We're surrendering the veil, we're surrendering the block to seeing that actual nature, right? So yeah, I hope I didn't confuse some of you, but if I didn't lose you, if you're still interested, this is practicing devotion in this kind of way is so helpful. It's not easy. It takes some study. It takes some, I'm not expecting any of you, if this is new things you're hearing. If you don't understand it now, why would you if you've never heard this before? We need to study the Dharma. We need to reflect on it. We need to think about it a lot, and then we need to implement it in practice. And then we can understand this realm I call Buddhist non-duality a little bit more. And then, of course, we can point devotion in that direction. But if we can't just yet, we have the outer refuge, and it's totally fine. Like the things you want to work with, the things you find difficult in your life, the things you want to understand and be more curious about and open up to with wisdom and compassion, you can visualize the Buddha in front of you and surrender to the Buddha. Open your heart, right? So this is a large part of devotion. Another part is just the inspiration, right? We have the life story of the Buddha. We have the life story of Padmasambhava and many, many other Mahasiddhas and great lineage masters. And we can read their life stories. We can reflect on them. We can visualize them and invite them into our space and essentially connect to devotion through inspiration, right? Being inspired by the possibilities. But why are we inspired by it? Again, it goes back to this notion that we can do it, right? So devotion is always about this thing we're trying to become more familiar with. We're trying to connect to more. That's why I'm pointing out view first. So how does this help our practice? Obviously, I mean, I hope it's become obvious so far. If we're experiencing more openness, compassion, flexibility, less focus on sort of me, and mine, that's going to help our practice, 100%, right? But also, in this kind of second layer of inspiration, it can really inspire us to practice more, right? When we experience devotion to, like when we read the life story of Milarepa as an example, it's just such an inspiring story. He was just such an amazing practitioner. It can inspire us to practice. Oh, I want to be like that. I want to be able to practice with that much endeavor and passion and a commitment. And then just by thinking that, by having that aspiration in relation to, devotion towards Milarepa or Padmasambhava or our own teachers or the His Holiness Dalai Lama or whoever, that can help our practice. That can help us to actually break through plateaus. Because what is really a plateau? It's a stagnant point where we've lost inspiration, where we've kind of lost a little bit of the plot. Why am I doing this? Is this really working? Is this helping? We start to doubt that. So when we develop devotion, we develop surrender combined with inspiration. And so it's sort of, there's not like a lot more logic to it than that, in my opinion. You just have to do it. You just have to try it. And when I'm really in a rut, it's hard. I've noticed it's quite hard for me to open to this. And sometimes I just have to sit down with like a rote prayer. Like in the Vajrayana lineages, we have all these like supplication prayers, which are basically devotional practices and or aspirational prayers. And I have to just sit down and very slowly chant them, try to connect to the meaning, make it a little less conceptual, and just do it. So sometimes we just sit down and we do it. And that helps us to connect to the devotion eventually, which then helps us to break through the plateau. Another way to connect to devotion is to go to sacred places, basically to do pilgrimage. So one of my main teachers at one point, I didn't think I was in a rut, but I think he did, which is the reason to have a teacher, because they can see things we can't. And he advised, oh, yeah, I think you should go to some like pilgrimage place. Like, you've kind of been hanging out in the city too long. Go to Nepal, go to India, like go visit some pilgrimage places. Because in these places, the energy is awake. The energy is like very helpful for our practice, because there's lots of other practitioners there, with the heart of devotion doing practice. There's people, kind of at our level. There's people much more experienced than us. There's maybe more beginners there. So there's all levels of practitioners, and it's really inspiring. And of course, at the end of the day, we're social creatures. So we learn from each other. We benefit from each other. So when we see others doing something, it can inspire us. And sometimes kind of like, I don't know, for me, like connecting to the lineage, like connecting to places that have been imbued with blessings, have been imbued with the energy of awakening, just really help. They help to kind of shift me out of things. And then of course, in these places, traditionally, we make offerings. We either make the offering of circumambulation, like circling a sacred place, or we make physical offerings, flowers, food, music, could be like incense offerings, all kinds of things, lamp offerings, and that really helps too. So yeah, those are a few things to do. Like if we're really having difficulty in our home meditation space and we're just having a tough time breaking through to devotion ourselves through just reciting aspirational prayers, or working in the way I was talking about earlier, through surrender. Also, we have a lot of visualization practices in Buddhism that help. Visualization really helps, actually, because it changes the environment through how we're working with our mind. Just visualizing the Buddha or Padmasambhava and reciting mantras, asking, requesting help, right? That's a big one around devotion, requesting help. But if that's not working, then we go to another place. Visit a community near you who's doing practice, can inspire you. Go to nature. If you can, get on a plane and go to some of these pilgrimage places in Asia. They really help. So I think I'll end it there. And if you have any further questions about this, please let me know, because devotion is a very big topic. There's no way I can cover every kind of nuance of it here. Just some of the things that, I initially thought of and or that work for me. Yeah, please feel free to reach out if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a comment with your question or, how this lands for you. If you want to hear more on a certain specific topic around devotion and how it helps to cut through stagnation in practice, let me know. If you're listening to my podcast, the audio podcast, you can always message me on my website, scotttusa.com. And as I said, this will be a series. So this is the first part in the series, what to do when you get stuck in your practice, when you hit a spiritual plateau. So I'm using devotion as a way to work with that. And then in the next episode, I'll cover another aspect of, just something else you can do when you hit some stagnation. So thanks so much for watching, for listening. Really appreciate you all. And take care. Best of luck.